The Democrat mindset, which is completely reinforced by the lib media, by the New York Times, by CNN, is that's a small price to pay for defending our democracy. This is the propaganda, unfortunately. People are suffering. Businesses are being destroyed. People are being murdered, raped, robbed, assaulted. And Democrats want you to worry more about Trump. And they're so blinded and they're so propagandized to at this point that actually worked enough. And that's what's really sad. On the crime issue, you see this all over the place. I talk about New York a lot. We've got a great audience and a growing audience as well out in Portland listening on KEX. And Clay and I want to at some point head out there. We might just head out there for a fun weekend. We'll just go hang, see some folks. But in Portland, you have a business owner here just talking about a business closing down after 15 break-ins to the same business. Play 13.
You're focusing on the 15 break-ins I've had after hours, but I've had countless other very dangerous interactions with my employees and criminals and, mentally ill or drug addicted people coming into the space. Nobody's going to go after these guys. And that therein lies the problem, is that the criminal behavior, they know it will not be punished. So that is why, I had the last 5 break-ins were within 24 days. They knew nobody's getting caught. This is fine.
Clay, this is the reality in so many places in major cities across America. All the data shows, and I want to get into what they're doing in New York, because it is the people that are supposed to enforce criminal law. What they're doing, in my mind, should be criminal. The complete abdication of law and order. This is a Democrat mindset, and there's the same mania. I mean, the same manic. Doesn't matter what the data is. It's like they're on some quest, and this is just the suffering. They have this with COVID. They have this with crime. No sane person could look at what Democrats in charge in these places are doing and think that it's not making the situation worse, and they don't care. I mean, Karen Bass just beat out Caruso in Los Angeles. Karen Bass is going to make everything worse.
Yes. That's the real threat to democracy, is when leaders make poor choices and they aren't held accountable for those poor choices. And when they even refuse to acknowledge that they've made errors and continue to march down the same path that they're already on.
We talk about movies a fair amount on the show. And there's one that comes to mind a little bit these days when I'm seeing. I was just up in New York with family, and so I was in Midtown where I spend most of my time. I was in the iHeart studio there, and then walking around the streets. Very crowded, a lot of tourists on the streets these days, which is good to see, but also people a bit anxious, concerns out there about how safe it is, certainly about how safe it is on the subway, which makes perfect sense given the realities of the New York City subway. But I mentioned, and I'll get into that in a second, I mentioned movies. Clay, there was this movie back in 1974. I used to watch all the action movies, right? If it was an action movie made in the 70s, the 80s, or the 90s, I was pretty much on board. So I celebrated not just Schwarzenegger and Stallone, the two greats of the genre, but even Dolph Lundgren, Van Damme, Charles Bronson. I mean, go down the list, like Chuck Norris, obviously. I can't name them all right now, but I saw them all, man. And I saw the ones with numerals after the movie titles where it was not exactly a critical or audience hit. I just kept seeing all these different action movies. Death Wish came out in 1974. Death Wish was about, it was a Charles Bronson movie. It did well, and there were 5 of them, and then they made a remake in 2018. But it was about a decaying, unsafe New York City where this guy, an architect living in New York City, has street punks constantly, menacing everyone. And then eventually they go after and they harm and assault and do terrible things to his family. And he's just like, I've had enough. And he goes out there and he's a vigilante. And it was a very popular movie. Why was it a popular movie? Well, okay, you could say it was action, good guys, bad guys. But it also resonated because the New York City, my dad went to Columbia University in New York City, graduated in 1969. and then lived in New York for years, trying to make his way in the world of finance. He tells stories about what it was like in the 70s. You had the subways covered, all of them covered in graffiti, broken windows all over the place, broken windows, policing we get from just fixing that issue. And people had just had enough. And I'm telling you, we're reaching a point now where New York, for some people, is starting to feel like it is trending back in that direction. I know they're going to say the numbers aren't as bad as they were in even the 90s was actually the worst. People forget that. The 70s, it looked really bad, but the 90s was when you had the most violent crime in New York and a lot of other cities. 1990, I believe, was the high mark, 2,200 murders, right? How do you get to a place where you have 2,200 murders in New York City? Well, I could point you to the latest from the district attorney in the city of New York, where he's just essentially decided, Clay, to stop enforcing the law. The district attorney, Alvin Bragg, in a lot of cases, not in all cases, he has downgraded 52% of felony cases to misdemeanors. Half of the felonies that come before him, he makes effectively a nothing. He treats it like a nothing burger. He wins a conviction 51% of the time. That is, just so everyone understands, in federal criminal court, your chance of getting convicted, you're about basically 97% of them are convictions, 98% are convictions, 51% convictions. And this is between 2013 and 2020, downgraded cases by Cyrus Vance never once exceeded even 40%. So crime is going up. And the district attorney of New York is treating crime less seriously and letting more people get away with it. This is what happens. This is why people start becoming crazy about not wanting to go on the subways and why vigilantes may even pop up in the future.
I saw that they said subway crime was up 40% in the last year, which is a pretty massive increase. And unfortunately, what's going on right now is you are seeding the cities and states for elevated rates of crime going forward because you are not enforcing the law. Everybody looks around. This was the broken windows theory of policing, Buck, and the idea, which has been proven correct in many different respects, was low-level offenses. Because you can understand if you're out there and you're saying, why are the police, arresting somebody for a relatively minor offense, right? And when there's all these other more serious things going on, is that they're all connected. And when you see a community that allows violence and allows crime to occur, you are more likely yourself to perpetrate violence in the same way that when you see one broken window, you're more likely to pick up a rock and throw another broken window, and that feeds on itself. And what right now I think what we're seeing, Buck, is the feeding on itself aspect of low crime policies. And we're going to have to go back, and I'm curious how long it's going to take until we get there to an era when it's so widespread, the violence. Because if you'll remember, in 1994, when the crime bill was passed, things were so bad that Democrats and Republicans both agreed that crime was out of control and something had to be done about it. And ironically, even though he now rejects it, the one thing that Joe Biden might have gotten right in his political career was supporting that 1994 crime bill. Some Democrats tend to be moderate, tend to be the sane element of the Democrat Party, are now recognizing, hey, we failed on crime. It's time to address this. But a lot of them are still saying what you said at the beginning, oh, look at the data. It's been far worse before. Well, yeah, that's true. But that doesn't mean it can't get worse rapidly in short order. And what we've never seen before is this rapid of an escalation in violent crime if you go back and compare it to 2019. And New York City, there's a great article about the election, Buck, saying that we talked about how, I think I read it in the New York Times this weekend, the Sunday edition, Long Island in particular, where I know we have a lot of people listening, basically had a monstrous red wave. That they flipped several congressional districts that Biden won by double digits to the Republican Party. Crime is visceral in New York City in a way that maybe it's not as visceral in other parts of the country.
But just, it's worth, I think, everyone understanding that the mindset of your average Democrat voting in New York City and in Los Angeles is, at this point, because everyone knows that you go into drugstores, and I mean in the most populous neighborhoods, not in the high crime neighborhoods. That's been the case for a long time. I'm talking about Midtown Manhattan. I'm talking about Santa Monica in Los Angeles. I'm talking about the West Side in Los Angeles, closer to the ocean, where you have a lot of fancier neighborhoods, and things are on lockdown. And there are people living in tent cities in the streets. You know, Governor Gavin Newsom, who says he's not running for president, Clay. We'll see. I don't know. We'll see.
He said
Maybe.
No matter what Biden does, he's not running for president. Now, this guy's a world-class liar, so I don't give him any credence here whatsoever, but it is interesting that he put it out publicly.
But there's a lot of ways to calculate crime and a lot of ways to understand how it affects people in their day-to-day lives. The homelessness situation, which is absolutely tied into the problems of petty larceny and drug overdoses and drug dealing and a whole range of issues. But the homeless situation in California, where they have more homeless people than any other state in the entire country, has turned into all this finger pointing among Democrats because they know it's a problem. So what happens is Gavin Newsom says to the mayor of San Francisco, London Breed says to the mayor of Los Angeles, etc. Go down all these. There's so many cities actually in the state of California. You have to fix the homelessness problem, or else we're going to start holding back funds from you. This is what is now. This is the latest on this. And they're saying, well, if you hold back state funds, the problem's going to get even worse. And no one's actually fixing anything. They're just pointing fingers of blame to say it's not my fault. I need more of this, or they need more of that, or whatever the case may be. But what we saw, unfortunately, in this election is for a lot of Democrats, the possibility of somebody, attacking you on your way home, ransacking your store, all manner of crimes. I mean, even in New York, Clay, I think I've had, in the last 6 months, I had 4 times someone came up to me, demanded money. I ignored them. They start cursing at me, threatening to stab me or whatever. This is just life in New York City in Midtown. That's going on. The Democrat mindset, which is completely reinforced by the lib media, by the New York Times, by CNN, is that's a small price to pay for defending our democracy. This is the propaganda, unfortunately. People are suffering. Businesses are being destroyed. People are being murdered, raped, robbed, assaulted. And Democrats want you to worry more about Trump. And they're so blinded and they're so propagandized to at this point that actually worked enough. And that's what's really sad.
Yeah, and I think that's a big picture question for all of 2023, which everyone listening to us is going to have to analyze in some form or fashion as the 2024 election, which we told you would effectively start the day after the 2022 election was over. You're going to have to analyze that for Trump. Is the branding of Trump so effective when it comes to independence that he's almost unable to win a nationwide election? Or do you believe that that he can still get it done? Again, I think it's such an interesting question, and that is, give him credit, even though it's not deserved and even though it's unfair. The Democrat Party basically aligned behind, so did Washington Post, New York Times, MSNBC, and CNN, something that is a lie, which is Donald Trump is the biggest threat to American democracy in the world. I mean, that's basically what they are saying. And enough people have bought it that it's very hard to convince people that that's not true.
Yeah, unfortunately, the voting Democrats went along with that, and they would go along with whatever the apparatus tells them. So that's a huge challenge. But they were able to get enough independent and swing voters to believe that at some level.
That's the part that's tough.
And that's the part of it that really, and look, we have to face that. But there are people, there are voters in Maricopa County. This is based on the exit polling, and I know the machine shut down and they did the dirty tricks. We said they were going to do the dirty tricks, but there were independent voters. There were, the kind of legacy McCain, moderate GOP types who said, yeah, okay, maybe things are getting much more dangerous in Phoenix, but I can't vote for something that's going to be someone who's going to be a threat to our democracy. I mean, they actually convinced themselves that that's more important. So we have to keep hammering this and pointing out that, first of all, there are a lot of lies around the criminal justice reform movement. I'm going to say it. Donald Trump shouldn't have gone along with some of this criminal justice reform stuff. It actually did not help. It did not make things better. No one seems to want to have that conversation. I actually look at the data. I look at what's happened in the cities where they've instituted some of these policies and programs. And, just the idea that we're locking up all these people for nonviolent, low-level drug offenses, that is not true. That's actually not happening. You have to move a lot of weight, and the notion that somebody who has a weapon while they're selling illegal drugs isn't connected to violent criminal activity. Why is the drug dealer on the corner carrying a Glock in his pants? It's not so he can just show it to his friends. Like, we need to actually start being honest about what criminality really is in America and how it happens.
And also people need to understand the concept of pleading down to charges. When somebody says, oh, this person's in jail because they had marijuana in possession or whatever. First of all, it might have been a lot of marijuana. Secondly, they may have had 4 more serious charges that were maybe violent in nature, and they pled down to the less serious of those charges so that it seems as if they have been convicted of a serious crime only relating to marijuana, when the 4 things they did on top of that is actually why they have pled to the crime.
And if you really want to know what hypocrites they are and what frauds they are on this issue, you look at the way that big city DAs, all Democrats, Democrat in New York, Democrat in Philadelphia, Democrat in Chicago, the big city DAs constantly talking about how we need stricter gun laws. But then when people have illegal firearms, and not because they were going quail hunting on the weekend, okay? We're not talking about somebody with a side-by-side who's going after some pheasant on the weekend and haven't registered their weapon or something. We're talking about gangbangers with handguns. And what do the big city DAs say? Oh, we don't want to ruin this young man's life by charging him with a serious crime, even though he's maybe a felon in possession of a firearm, a crime on top of a crime. In Philadelphia, they're letting more than half of illegal gun crimes go. But they think an assault rifle ban is going to, I got news for anybody who doesn't know this, whether it's in New York or Philly or any major city, they're not actually shooting each other overwhelmingly. I mean, less than 1% of the time with an AR, with a rail system and an ACOG on top. No, they're pulling out a pistol and they're shooting people and they don't prosecute them. I mean, even though it didn't have the impact that it should have in this midterm, we need to keep talking about this issue so people, one, understand, maybe it's time to make some different decisions about where you want to be, whether you're in a city, in certain states. That's another part of this, too, because I think the mechanisms for improvement aren't sound enough that people won't have to suffer through this for years to come. I think New York has got maybe 4 or 5 more years of downtrend here before people wake up.